What comes to mind when you think of festivals? Music, dance, colorful confetti, and endless fun, right? You are wrong. When we peel back the dusty pages of history, we encounter a completely different world where celebration was intertwined with blood, chaos, and death. Our ancestors knew how to party, but their idea of fun is the stuff of modern nightmares. From women being whipped in the streets to kings being slapped in the face and hearts being ripped out alive. Here are the top 5 most interesting festivals of the ancient world that you couldn't even imagine today. We start our list with history's greatest social experiment, Rome's upside-down world. Imagine a day where slaves shout orders at their masters, the wealthiest nobles work as waiters, and gambling is not a crime, but an act of worship. This is ancient Rome's wildest week, Saturnalia. When we think of ancient Rome, we think of disciplined legions and strict rules, right? But there was a time of year when all Roman laws, social norms, and moral boundaries were completely suspended. Celebrated in December in honor of the agricultural god Saturn, this was not just a harvest Thanksgiving. It was a literal reverse world ritual. During the festival, Rome's strict hierarchy was turned upside down. Normally, a slave looking at his master the wrong way was a deadly crime, but during Saturnalia, slaves were freed and even wore their master's clothes. Slaves sat at the head of the banquet table, while their masters served them food and wine. This was a reenactment of a mythological golden age, where all men were equal, but it didn't stop at dinner service. A mock king, called the Saturnalia king, was chosen, usually from the lowest social status. He would give ridiculous orders like sing naked or throw that man in the pool, and everyone had to obey. The streets echoed with shouts of "Io Saturnalia." But this freedom didn't last forever. When the festival ended, slaves returned to their chains and masters to their thrones. When the joyful chaos of Saturnalia ended, the streets of Rome echoed not with laughter, but with the crack of whips. If ordering your master around wasn't enough for you, next up is getting beaten for the sake of love. You might be expecting chocolate from your partner today, but if you were in Rome 2,000 years ago, you'd be lining up to be whipped by naked men running through the streets with bloody goat skins. Meet the dark ancestor of Valentine's Day, Lupercalia. In the modern world, February is associated with romance. But in ancient Rome, February 15th was a day filled with brutality and magic. Lupercalia was a primal festival dedicated to the she-wolf that nursed Rome's founders. It began in a dark cave where goats and a dog were sacrificed. The sacrificial blood was smeared on the priests' foreheads and wiped off with wool dipped in milk, and the priests were required to laugh during this process. Then came the real shock. The priests would cut the goat skins into strips called februa and run half-naked through the streets of Rome, striking anyone in their path. It sounds like a horrific attack, but Roman women didn't run away. They deliberately stepped into their path. It was believed that the touch of the skin granted fertility and an easy childbirth. Women held out their hands to receive the lashes as a blessing. This festival continued for centuries until it was banned by the Pope, leaving a bloody shadow behind the Valentine's Day we celebrate today. While Romans chased each other through the streets, things were much more political and dangerous in Babylon, the cradle of civilization. In Rome, the people were whipped, but in Babylon, the target was not a commoner, but the most powerful man in the world. Imagine the most powerful king of a nation. Now imagine that king being forced to kneel in front of everyone, stripped of his crown, and slapped across the face by the high priest with full force. If the king didn't cry, the entire country would be destroyed. During the Babylonian New Year festival, AKITU, the balance of power underwent a shocking test to ward off the wrath of the gods. The most critical moment of the 12-day festival occurred on the 5th day. The king of Babylon would enter the temple of the god Marduk not as a ruler, but as a criminal. The high priest would take the king's crown, scepter, and sword. The most powerful man on earth would kneel and swear that he had treated his people well. And then came the shocking moment. The high priest would slap the king across the face as hard as he could. This wasn't symbolic. It had to hurt. Why? Because the king had to shed tears. If the king cried from the pain, it meant God Marduk was pleased, and Babylon would prosper for another year. If the king's eyes remained dry, it was an omen of disaster. It was believed the king would die and the empire would fall. The fate of a massive empire depended on a king getting beaten and shedding a tear. The Babylonian king could at least save his head with a slap and some tears. But across the ocean, in the Aztec lands, the price of being declared a god was much heavier. Here you couldn't escape with just a slap. Imagine living like a king for a whole year, eating the best food, wearing the finest clothes. There is only one condition. At the end of the year, your heart will be ripped out alive and offered to the gods. This is the Aztecs' most terrifying yet honorable festival. TOXCATL, held in honor of Tezcatlipoca, the god of the smoking mirror. Preparations began a year in advance. A physically perfect young man was chosen from among war captives. He was no longer a prisoner. He became a living god on earth. For 12 months he wore gold, people worshipped him, and he was given 4 beautiful women as wives. He lived life's pleasures to the fullest. But this dream life had an expiration date. On the day of the festival, as the young man climbed the stairs of the temple, he would break the flutes he had played throughout the year, one by one, symbolizing the fleeting nature of life. When he reached the top, priests would lay him on a stone, slice open his chest with an obsidian knife, and offer his still-beating heart to the sun. For the Aztecs, this wasn't murder, but a sacred energy transfer that kept the universe running. TOXCATL was the brutal proof of the philosophy that there is no life without death. The Aztec brutality was out in the open, bloody, tangible, and terrifying. However, the greatest festival of the ancient world was built not on noise, but on silence and deadly secrets. A secret so deep that revealing it was punishable by death. There was a festival in the ancient world where those who revealed what happened inside were executed. From Plato to Emperor Hadrian, everyone participated, but no one could speak about history's greatest secret, the Eleusinian mysteries. This festival wasn't a party. It was a ritual to conquer the fear of death. Based on the myth of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone, the ceremonies were so sacred and secret that we still don't know the full details today. Thousands of people would walk from Athens to Eleusis, drinking a special potion called kykeon along the way, which likely contained hallucinogenic mushrooms. This drink altered the participants' consciousness. Once inside the temple, all ties with the outside world were cut. In the darkness, through lightning, underground sounds, and sudden lights, a death and rebirth experience was simulated. Participants emerged as epopteia, or seers, having learned a terrible secret that life after death was not an end, but a new beginning. Cicero said of this festival, "It taught us not only to live with joy, but to die with a better hope." Eleusis was the ultimate psychological experiment where ancient man defied death. Those civilizations that look boring and gray in history books actually survived through these rituals that pushed the limits of human psychology, mixing fear and ecstasy. For them, a festival was not just a party, it was a battle for survival. So, which of these festivals would you have dared to attend? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to get lost further in the dark corridors of history.